just stay there to finish your homework, or are you gonna join us? All right. So the idea is that, guys, try to go in the same order that I gave you, because the way that everything is organized, like, it's easier to remember because everything is like grouped by bones and features. So let's start with Calvaria. So Calvaria refers simply to the dome of the skull. So it's made of several bones, but this is Calvaria. Okay. So frontal bone is, of course, your forehead, right? It goes all the way to your orbits, to the eye sockets, and goes up close to the crown. There we go. Oops. Sorry, it doesn't fit that well for some reason. There we go. All right. So this is your forehead. It's pretty large. There's only one feature that I'm asking you to know about forehead, is that right here above your orbits on both sides there are hollow areas inside the bone. They're called frontal sinuses. Can you see them? No, you cannot, because the only way to see them is to actually cut the bone, and not where it's cut right now, a little bit lower. And if you look inside the bone, you will see like empty hollow areas. Okay, they are the sinuses. You probably have noticed that when I was going through all these bones, I actually mentioned a few more. So there are 4 sinuses in total. Right? One of them is in the frontal bone, one in the sphenoid, one in the ethmoid, and one in maxilla. Right? Collectively, they're called perinasal sinuses. Right? So perinasal, like around the nasal cavity. Right? So those sinuses are empty areas again. So when you breathe through your nose, the air can move through those sinuses. The sinuses that warm up the air that you are breathing in. They moisten it, so it's not dry anymore, and they also remove and they also filter out some of the particles or particulates from the air. So when you finally inhale the air into your lungs, it's much more hospitable to that environment. Right. So one of the sinuses is in the inside the frontal bone. You also need to know parietal bones. There are 2 of them. Here they are, right? And there are 4 sutures associated with those 2 bones. So the word suture is referring to an immovable joint, meaning that even though it seems like a skull is like one giant bone, in reality, of course, it's made of many bones put together, but they are not connected by joints that we are used to, the one that moves, but the ones that are not moving at all. So this zigzag lines that you see here and here, these are the sutures that you need to know. Okay. So you have the sagittal suture. Sagittal suture refers to as in sagittal plane. Remember, sagittal section, easy to remember, separates you into half, right and left. You have the coronal suture. Coronal suture connects the forehead or the frontal bone to the parietal bones. You have the lambdoid suture. That's this long suture here, right, connecting the occipital bone to parietal bones. And you have also squamous suture connecting the parietal bones to this blue temporal bone. Right, so the 4 sutures that you need to know. Speaking of temporal bone, let's see. So temporal bone is this blue bone here, and also this little chunk of the yellow bone. It's actually this is part of the same blue bone here. You need to know a few things. Let's see. Zygomatic process. Speaking of, this yellow portion here is the zygomatic process of temporal bone. Right. So zygomatic process of temporal bone. The yellow bone itself here is the zygomatic bone, and this purple portion of the maxilla is also called zygomatic process of maxilla. You can actually trace it. If you put your finger to the ear right here, you can feel like this bump. You can trace it. It goes right into your cheek, inside your cheek, and goes all the way under your nose here. So this entire portion is called the zygomatic arch. So this is that, right? So zygomatic arch is your cheekbone. It's made of 3 bones. It's made of temporal bone, zygomatic bone, and maxilla. So there are 3 bones in this cheekbone. So By the way, I just called it process. When you say process, what are we actually talking about? What's a process of a bone?
A projection?
A projection of a bone. So whenever you see like a portion of a bone sticking out, we're going to call it process. Okay. So there are two processes here. Both of them are zygomatic processes. One comes from the temporal bone. One comes from the maxilla. For temporal bone, you will also need to know mandibular fossa. Right. So the mandibular, so it has something to do with mandible, right? So here's the mandible, lower jaw, right? If I remove it, notice that it goes right. It was attached to the temporal bone. I just removed it, right? So notice that this socket here, like this deepness in the temporal bone. My finger is inside it right now. Wait, no, it should be here. Sorry, there we go. I wasn't looking. So this deepness or socket is called a fossa. Okay. So from now on, whenever you hear the word fossa, it refers to a portion of the bone that will connect to the other bone, or a deepness in the bone where another bone will be inserted. Okay. That's why it's called mandibular fossa. So mandible fits in there. External acoustic meatus. Here we go. That's where I mistakenly placed my finger before. So this is the external ear. That's where the auditory canal enters the skull. Styloid process and mastoid processes. There are two of them. You see the large one is the mastoid process. The sharp one is the styloid process. What do? They serve as points of attachment for muscles that will rotate your skull. And that's all you need to know for temporal bone. Moving down to occipital bone. That's this blue bone here. It's actually bigger than it looks because it goes all the way to the base of the skull. I need to get another skull so I can show you without the problems from the vertebra. There we go. So this entire thing here, look, all of this is occipital bone. There are two really important features here that you need to know. There's a huge hole in that bone. Now, whenever there is a hole in a bone, we call it a foramen. Exactly. Foramen singular, foramina plural. So it's a big hole in the bone. So it's a foramen magnum, right? Magnum is a large hole in the bone. Next to it, there are also a couple of pads. Like, do you see like this two growth on a bone? They're not big enough to be called projections or processes, and they also have a different purpose. These two pads are used for articulation with vertebral column, and whatever protrusions in a bone that are used for articulation or for joints with other bones are called condyles. So these are condyles because they are on occipital bone, occipital condyles. We are moving on to sphenoid bone. So the sphenoid bone is this purple bone here. What does it look like? What does it remind you of?
Butterfly.
Butterfly. Me too. Some people say bat. To me, it's a butterfly. Right. So this butterfly bone is called the sphenoid bone. So my finger right now is sitting right there on the body of the butterfly. So that is the body of the sphenoid. You can see the wings of the butterfly. Those are the wings of the sphenoid. Sphenoid bone also has sphenoid sinuses. You cannot see them. The only way to see them is to cut the bone sagittally and separate it into inside that bone. There are like these huge hollow areas, which are the sphenoid sinuses. My finger right now is sitting in this deepness, like there is a depression in the body of the sphenoid. Can you see it, guys? Mm-hmm. My finger's inside it actually. Mm-hmm. Right, so this little saddle-like structure is called the sella turcica, and that's where the pituitary gland is sitting at the base of the brain. So it's kind of like the pituitary gland sitting inside it. Let's see, sinus, sella turcica, greater wings, and that's it. But so this is actually a relatively large bone, but there's another bone that's sitting right in front of it. That is the ethmoid bone. Looks pretty small, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's not. Yeah.
I have a question. Which are the greater wings and which are the lesser wings?
So the greater wings are the bigger wings. That's this ones here. The lesser wings are the smaller wings. The ones that look smaller are the lesser wings. The one that looks bigger are the greater wings.
Okay.
So sella turcica, ethmoid bone is actually is the deepest bone we have. It's like it's all the way inside your skull. This is the only portion that you see. It also, if you look through the nose, you see this osseous septum separating the nose into right and left. Right, that's also ethmoid bone. So on the top, what you see on the superior end is that you can see that there's like it looks like a wall built in the middle. Can you see the wall? Right, like a ridge in the middle of the bone.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and this ridge is sitting on a flat plateau. So you have like this portion of the bone and then that portion of the bone. Right, so this ridge is called crista galli, and the flat plateau is called cribriform plate. If you look at the cribriform plate, do you see like this spot marks? Like it looks like somebody actually took like a pickaxe or something and just chipped it away. Do you see like spot marks on the surface of the flat surface of the ethmoid bone? Right, so they're not really pot marks, of course. They are holes in a bone. So whenever you see a hole in the bone, you call it foramen. And because you have so many of those, we're going to be calling them foramina, right? So plural. Foramina. So these are olfactory foramina. Olfactory, of course, refers to your sense of smell, right? So meaning that in the roof of your nose there is an olfactory patch, right? So it's kind of like a sensory tissue that when the air enters the nasal cavity, you can detect different kinds of aromatic molecules in there. So immediately that information is going to relate by the nerve directly into your brain. So this little microscopic holes, this foramina, allow that nerve to go straight from your nose right into your brain, so that the information can be delivered directly. Our most ancient sense, by the way, much more ancient than vision or taste or hearing or anything else. If you look through by the way, ethmoid bone also contains sinuses, ethmoid sinuses. We can see them, of course. Again, everything is inside. The osseous septum that separates the bone into right and left, the nose into right and left, that is called perpendicular plate. Right, so perpendicular plate separates the nose cavity and the nasal cavity into right and left. Mandible. All right, so your lower jaw, right? A couple of things. You can see there is a huge flat process sticking out here, so that's your carotid process. The significance of it is that it's used as a point of attachment for the muscles. So temporal muscle inserts onto this carotid process so you can elevate the jaw. Then you also need to know the mandibular condyle. Here we go. This is the mandibular condyle. My finger is on it. It's a condyle because it's a protrusion in the bone that will be used for articulation. What is it articulating with?
With the temporal.
With the temporal bone. Which part of the temporal bone? Where does it go? Take a look.
Maxilla.
Yeah, what do we call that structure?
Zygomatic? No.
Temporomandibular joint.
So temporal mandibular joint is the name of the joint that they create together, right? So temporal and mandibular bones are creating temporal mandibular joint. But the mandibular condyle goes into this deepness. What do we call the deepness?
Fossa.
The fossa, right? So mandibular condyle goes into the mandibular fossa, and they create the
Mandibular
joint.
fossa.
Maxilla. So Maxilla has a couple of processes. The first one I already told you that this little process here, the one that connects to the zygomatic bone, zygomatic process of maxilla. But also, if you look on the behind the teeth, you see this surface here? That's your palate. So that's a palatine process of maxilla, right? So if you just keep on pushing that way, at some point you will feel soft palate. Soft palate is already when you way past the maxilla and past this bone also, and now soft palate is here, where it's just soft tissue, no bones at all. So you were just touching palatine bones. So these are the palatine bones, the deeper portion of your hard palate, and this is all palatine process. Maxilla also has maxillary sinuses. They are right here, like behind your cheeks, right? And sometimes they get infected. You might have heard of those complications, like sometimes
Sinuses.
bacteria get in there, and they. Well, it's a good area for bacteria to grow. Let's just say because it's moist, humid, lots of nutrients. Carotenoid process. Got this. Palatine maxillary sinuses, zygomatic process. Only a couple of things left, guys. All right, so we have nasal bones. There are two of them. That's basically the bridge of your nose. Easy to remember. I mean, you can't mistake them with anything else. But right here, on the side of the nasal bones, there are these two black spots here. They're not really black, of course, but these are two small bones on both sides. These are called lacrimal bones. I've been told many times by my Spanish-speaking students that in Spanish it's something like lagrima or something.
Lagrima, tears. Yeah.
Lacrima, right? So it's probably easy to remember. What else do we have? Vomer. A vomer is a little tricky. So I already showed you the ethmoid bone, perpendicular plate here, and that is the nasal septum. But if you go deeper, it changes. There is another bone. Here is the vomer. See, it's also part of the osseous septum, but the inferior part. So if this bone, vomer, is connected to the ethmoid bone, specifically perpendicular plate of ethmoid bone, to create the entire osseous septum in your nose. So this is the vomer. Palatine bones, zygomatic bones, nasal bones, and that's all the bones that you need to know.
That's for next quiz, correct?
That's of course, guys.